Hello, I'm Carlos Romero from Apex, coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm part of the ACE network and pleased to be contributing to the CREE Learning Series. My topic is to explore how to foster internal support for CREE within organizations. What are some of the challenges that organizations experience in supporting CREE, and what are some ways in which an evaluator can advocate for CREE in their organization? My plan is to answer these questions and hopefully stimulate some thinking by talking a little bit about what things look like at Apex. So let me set the stage with a little context. First, Apex is my company. We've been providing evaluation services for almost 22 years now, and I lead a team of 15 professionals. So I have some organizational influence built in. Second, our portfolio is made up entirely of equity work, from our roots in bilingual and special education to our current work with adolescent and school-based healthcare. One way or another, our clients are working to solve wicked problems related to education, health, social, and racial equity. Third, I use the term equitable evaluation to include but not be limited to CREE. I define equitable evaluation as being mindful of and attentive to the relationship between perspectives and learning. And I'll say more on that later. But fourth and finally, this is all very much a work in progress, still more aspirational than reality. So I welcome feedback, and I'm looking forward to the conversation we might have later. Now, I've organized my thoughts around 5 big ideas: vision, jargon, mission, perspectives, and methods. And each of these could be their own sermon, but I'm going to touch just lightly enough to connect them to the topic at hand. And while I see them as related and cumulative, I think they stand on their own too, so you can take them a la carte. Let's start with a vision. Our vision at Apex is evaluation that works. And that means lots of different things. And much like equitable evaluation, it's more a statement about what we're fighting against: evaluation that doesn't work, because it's siloed, it gets in the way, it takes away time and money, it comes too late. It ends in a report that no one reads, and it perpetuates bias. It's a long list. Now, we think evaluation works best when it is about learning. In fact, our mission is learning. And we think evaluation works best when it advances equity. But the point here is one of alignment. What is the relationship between equitable evaluation and your organizational vision? And if there isn't close alignment, then you're going to have to figure out when to do it and when not to do it. And so for us, equitable evaluation is not one tool in our kit. It is the one lens through which we look at everything. So that's vision, foundational but insufficient. It tells you where you want to go, but not how to get there. Another way I describe our mission of learning is that we help people use data to build, share, test, and evolve their mental models about solving wicked problems related to education, health, economic, social, and racial equity. So that's a mouthful and includes some jargon. So let's talk about jargon. Now, jargon, by definition, refers to specialized language associated with a particular field or activity that may not be well understood outside that context. So it's signal if you're in on it and noise if you're on the outside looking in. But in the field of evaluation, I think our jargon is more noise than signal. And Mark Friedman talks a little bit about this in results-based accountability, where he points out all the terms we use, sometimes interchangeably, sometimes with important but hidden distinctions. Terms like goals, objectives, measures, indicators, outcomes, benchmarks. And then sometimes we add more noise with the modifiers we use, like strategic, performance, and targeted. So I'm on a quest to rehabilitate jargon as signal. And I see jargon like I see cholesterol. We tend to focus on the bad part and its consequences to the point that it's easy to forget that we need enough good cholesterol to survive. And so I've come up with a minimum set of the simplest, most universal, most actionable jargon to guide our work at Apex. And here they are: learning, knowledge, mental models, information, thinking, distinctions, systems, relationship, and perspectives. Now I'll say a little bit more about each of these, but the question here is this: is your organizational jargon signal or noise? And if it's the latter, that's going to be a huge challenge for supporting and advocating for CREE. Now that brings us to mission, because our jargon is more than just a list of terms. They go together to form our mission of learning. and they're a guide for the work, and they set the stage for more equitable evaluation practice. So here's what they look like put together in a formula. Learning is what happens when we change our current state of knowledge. And this is foundational because there are other kinds of evaluation. Accountability and compliance, proving and advocacy, those are all fine evaluation pursuits. But learning is about breaking new ground. It's about change. Now, knowledge is the product of information and thinking. And that's a systems thinking definition that comes from Derek and Laura Cabrera. We represent our knowledge as mental models about how the world works and how we want it to work. We form mental models to approximate reality, and then we test them based on feedback. That's evaluation. And in our line of work, those mental models are some sort of means-ends proposition. Our mental models encompass hypotheses, theories of change, logic models, goals, and objectives, any idea that we're evaluating. Information includes data, quantitative, qualitative, story, anything that will provide evidence and feedback for testing our mental models. Now, one of my favorite quotes is, context gives meaning to data. Data without context is meaningless. So information, like vision, is necessary but insufficient. Thinking is how we add structure to and derive meaning from information, which is the key to learning. Now, I ascribe to a very simple definition of systems thinking that I take from the Cabreras from Cornell. They've been my mentors in systems thinking, and they distill thinking to 4 universal patterns: distinctions, systems, relationships, and perspective, DSRP for short. So there's no time for that sermon, but get the book if you're interested. But that's a formula for learning, but it's agnostic when it comes to equitable evaluation, unless and until we consider the relationship between perspectives and learning. So let's look at perspectives. Perspectives comes last in this formula, and sometimes that's how we treat it, something we try not to forget about at the end. But perspectives is actually first and always. It's acting on everything, which I try to represent with this swoosh, kind of like a fractal formula. And attending to perspectives influences how we ask and answer evaluation questions. So let's walk through the formula one more time quickly from the perspective of perspective. First, with learning, is this evaluation even about learning? And are the people involved in and impacted by the mental model being evaluated included as learning stakeholders? Then we move to the mental model itself. What is the mental model here about implementation, about evaluation? To what extent is that mental model shared among the stakeholders? And says who? And that's one deep, probing, perspectives-based question you can ask throughout. Says who? Information. What information will be considered? What information will not be considered? What new information might we need, and how will we get it? Says who? And how are we going to think through this information? What distinctions bound the program and the evaluation? What other parts or wholes of the system and relationships might matter here? And says who? What other perspectives exist? Starting with those voices that are most vulnerable, least powerful, and most affected. So back to the topic at hand, the point here is to ask, what is the relationship between our mission and equitable evaluation? Do we have a common language that is thick with meaning? Is it something we can actually do, not just talk about? Is it universal, simple, repeatable? So finally, what does all this mean for methods? Because I believe one of the biggest challenges when it comes to supporting and advocating for equitable evaluation is the issue of methods. And I'll give you 3 quick stories. I recently saw an RFP from a foundation that laid out some ambitious learning goals, and it was about what I consider equity work. And then they stated experimental design is required. Then they added later, at a minimum, we'll consider a quasi-experimental design. Second, I met an evaluator at an equitable evaluation themed meeting a few years ago, and he made this comment in an informal setting with some frustration. He said, if equitable evaluation is agnostic to methods, why does everyone seem so against randomized control trials? That's my training. It's what I like to do. It's what I'm good at. So that was his perspective, is he wanted to make good use of his methods. And finally, I'm reminded of a principal that I encountered who said that he wouldn't make a move. He wouldn't do a single thing unless it was based on proven scientific evidence. So the point is that the expectations, assumptions, and presumptions about methods from both the funders, purveyors, and consumers of evaluation can be a huge challenge when it comes to equitable evaluation. And I believe we need to start changing how and when we think about methods in relation to learning. So I've been playing with a methods matching schema that Derek Cabrera introduced me to over 10 years ago now that illustrates the relationship between our state of knowledge and the methods we use. So when knowledge is low, we rely on more open-ended qualitative methods. So Derek uses Jane Goodall's seminal work with chimpanzees as an example. Now I have two problems with this. First, I feel like this depicts a hierarchy of methods that perpetuates notions of rigor that we're trying to change. Second, it's using state of knowledge as the baseline, which feels too abstract, too academic, and frankly, an overwhelming place to start. So last year, Derek came out with a new version and he flipped the axes. And so I took inspiration from that and came up with another version that flipped the state of knowledge with the learning needs. And so see how shifting the perspective from knowledge to learning changes another perspective about how we think of methods. Now the vertical axis is a hierarchy, not one of rigor, but of emergence. And now observation or storytelling become the most important thing when learning is on the line. See, it's kind of a trick question because in our line of work, the learning needs for at least some part of our mental model will be high. It's the nature of wicked problems, which probably should have been on my jargon list. Now, I like the definition I found from Interaction Design Foundation. Wicked problems are problems with many interdependent factors, making them seem impossible to solve. And because the factors are often incomplete, in flux, and difficult to define, solving wicked problems requires a deep understanding of the stakeholders involved and an innovative approach provided by design thinking. Now, I think that definition makes the case for perspectives, but I like this definition because the contrast to tame problems starts to hint at methods. A tame problem is well-defined and stable and can be compared to similar problems and solutions. Those solutions can be tested in controlled conditions and objectively evaluated as effective or ineffective. Wicked problems, on the other hand, are not well-defined, and it's difficult to reach consensus on root cause or solutions. They are defined from a particular point of view, which involves subjective, moral, political, and other self-interests. So this new view helps illustrate which methods will support breakthroughs, and that should influence how and when we think about mixed methods. Now, I want to close by touching on the fourth wave of systems thinking that's coming soon to an academic journal near you. I know, you've been warned, and you heard it here first. But one of the big ideas, as I understand it, involves this tension between universality and diversity. Universality is a common way to talk about our thinking across disciplines so that we can make progress on the diversity of unsolved wicked problems that also cut across so many disciplines. So whether it's DSRP or my formula for learning, it's not about one way to think or one way to do things. It's not about constraining thinking, but to reveal it and propel it within an organization or a movement like equitable evaluation or an entire field of evaluation. So thanks for listening. I look forward to the discussion.